Greetings friends at the Summary Club. Today we are going to talk about who Osho really is and what legacy he left behind. After all, he is considered, and rightly so, one of the most famous spiritual teachers of the modern age. This is true even now, many years after his death. He left this perishable world in 1990, but there are still dozens, if not hundreds, of Osho ashrams and retreat centers around the world, and hundreds of thousands of people consider him the wisest and most enlightening spiritual teacher of our era, although there are also many who hate him. Moreover, it seems that in recent years his personality has been argued and talked about more and more, and he himself has only become more and more popular. Some of his books, indeed, according to the statistics of book publishers, are read in tens of millions of copies or more. Even on our modest self-development portal, the views of his audiobooks have long exceeded 1 million, and this despite the fact that we are just beginning to put out audiobooks by Osho as narrated by our wonderful friend Nikasho, who is the best narrator of such spiritual literature. In fact, that's why we couldn't get past it and begin our series of videos about finally truthful and unbiased biographies of spiritual teachers and famous leaders with the most prominent and controversial self-development personality of the 20th century. After all, there are indeed 4 private jets, a helicopter, almost 100 top-of-the-line Rolls-Royce cars, and hundreds of tax-free millions of dollars from religious activities in personal bank accounts, not to mention the almost public orgies that are already rare among spiritual leaders, and even state charges of almost trying to overthrow the government, as well as the biggest retreat centers and hundreds of millions of devotees. All of this is actually in Osho's biography, who is not really Osho at all, but took the name just a couple of years before he died. But the most important thing is that Osho's books have really become for many a starting point on the path of self-development, providing answers to many questions. As they say, this is a person who definitely deserves attention, so let's take a closer look at who Osho is. What is Osho's real name? Osho's real name is Chandra Mohan Jain, and his spiritual name is Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, which in Sanskrit means the blessed one who is a god. It is not modest, of course, but the figure of Osho himself is quite extraordinary. The name Osho is translated from Sanskrit as dissolved in the ocean. There may be different interpretations, for example, dissolved in the ocean of higher consciousness, or in the ocean of bliss. He also had a great number of other nicknames and pseudonyms, many of which he gave to himself, but in any case Osho unambiguously contributed to the development of spirituality in his native India and around the world. What did Osho preach? In general, Osho promoted a spiritual practice that is based on the so-called middle way, where we do not withdraw from the world, do not shut ourselves away in a cave or a cell, but at the same time practice non-attachment to everything that is happening, recognizing it all as an illusory game. Just like children in the sandbox, they look so serious when they're molding little Easter eggs and building big castles, but at the same time they easily leave the sandbox when the time comes. Osho's personality is truly ambiguous. On the one hand, he gives people a broader view of reality, outside of religious dogma, allowing them to test everything through personal experience. On the other hand, Osho was often criticized for his loose views on sexual relations. He also practiced various tantric practices, for which the media once dubbed him a true sex guru. And as is often the case, when recognition comes to a person after his death. After Osho left his body, his teachings became even more popular, and he himself came to be considered a great teacher. Although during his lifetime Osho opened many ashrams all over the world. Osho's city. In the US, he even managed to buy an entire huge ranch for $6 million and founded a settlement town, which eventually lived about 5,000 people. There were restaurants, hotels and casinos, and even an entire airport. In fact, there was practically a whole country named after Osho, where festivals of 15,000 or more people were regularly held. In the end, though, it didn't end very well, although it was no less epic. Osho's community gradually became dissatisfied with many locals as well as the US government, with all sorts of little things like noise, drugs and illegal constructions. But in the end, instead of justifying himself, Osho for some reason took a vow of silence for 4 years and handed over all matters to his follower, a certain Sheela. Persecution of Osho by the American government and Russia. Eventually this same Sheela, having intimidated the local farmers, fled into obscurity, taking more than $55 million with her. And Osho was put on trial after angry authorities sent in a SWAT team to check the life of the town and found several warehouses and factories, weapons and drugs of course. There were also accusations of almost a biological attack and poisoning of almost an entire town, when about 750 residents were affected, but all this was very tentatively proven and had no direct relation to Osho's activities and personality in the end. So the authorities decided not to bother with religious disputes, and in the end he was simply deported from the US territory on several charges, received a 10-year suspended sentence and a $300,000 fine, while continuing freely to lecture and teach in his ashrams in India. After all this, not all countries viewed Osho's teachings positively, and when he was deported from America, more than 20 countries declared him persona non grata in their territories. Also in Russia, the Osho movement was recognized as a destructive sect, although at that time such a title was not difficult to obtain, and as a result it also had little evidence and no real problems with the authorities. Osho ashrams. Life in Osho's ashrams, or so-called spiritual centers, was organized according to the following principle. Early in the morning the devotees would spend an hour in dynamic meditation, and then Osho would give a lecture. Those who personally attended his lectures claim that Osho was very well read, easily quoted scriptures from various religions, and had a good sense of humor, diluting serious conversations with jokes, sarcasm, and even various provocations of the audience. During the day the ashram also practiced Kundalini meditation and Nataraj meditation. In the evening Osho talked with his closest disciples on various spiritual subjects. There were no special rules of conduct in the ashram, but Osho was categorically against tobacco and other drugs. This was always suppressed in the ashram. Also, those who came to the lecture had to be tested for odors, as Osho was allergic to certain odors.
Subscribe to the Summary Club and watch short versions of the most popular and useful videos every day.
Criticism and hatred of Osho. Osho's behavior, as we have already mentioned, was often rather flamboyant. He was sometimes harsh in his statements, so he often provoked a negative reaction from the media and the public. And his rather liberal views on sexual relations became the main subject of Osho's condemnation. But that's not all. Osho was also famous for his negative attitude towards Christianity and not very flattering remarks about leaders and representatives of other religions and spiritual directions. For example, Osho's negative statement about Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is quite well known. I knew Swami Prabhupada, who created a society of Krishna devotees. He was one of the dumbest morons, but he had a talent for attracting idiots to him. If you want to see a big cluster of dumbuses, go to the Krishnates. I criticize Krishna, so the Krishnates don't like me. Prabhupada was very angry with me because I called him a moron, but that's the way it was. Prabhupada was very angry with me because he could not answer me anything to my criticism of Krishna. If he had been an honest man and surrounded by honest people, he would have called Krishna the meanest thug. Some of Osho's disciples were also involved in various illegal activities including drug dealing. And though Osho himself was most likely not involved in this, it did not add to his public affection either. Eventually, the growing hostility toward Osho led to an assassination attempt in 1980. One day during a lecture an audience member threw a knife at Osho, but missed. Popular Osho books. But the most interesting and useful thing in this whole story is Osho's books, because Osho actually wrote and recorded almost nothing, so all of Osho's books are his conversations with his disciples, written down over 20 years of his lectures and sermons. The most devoted followers, and later the teachers themselves, systematized this information and published it in the form of books, of which there are probably more than 1,000 today. And despite all its ambiguity, Osho has published many worthy books, which as we have already realized he did not write directly, but are allegedly recorded from his words and old writings. That, by the way, does not diminish their genius and deserve popularity. For example, in the book Morning Meditations, Osho talks about how to turn one's whole life into continuous meditation and thus be constantly in a stream of joy and bliss. And in The Art of Inner Ecstasy he says that all bliss is already inside of us, and there is no point in seeking it outside, being attached to some external objects of pleasure. In this book, Osho gives specific practices that allow even the beginner to advance very quickly on the path of knowing oneself and discovering the source of eternal bliss within. In Death is the Greatest Deception, Osho writes that death does not exist at all, it is only a change in the human condition, a transition to another reality, in other words, a new stage of development. Osho tells us that death is not the end of the path at all but a kind of reset which allows us to reach another level of reality. Another amazing book by Osho, Love, Freedom, Loneliness, reveals quite actual problems of relationships between people. It describes the reasons for the difficulties people encounter in family and social life and suggests ways to solve them. In Compassion, Osho describes harmonious interaction with others in the world around us. The author teaches how to stop judging people and understand that everyone has his own way. The author's thoughts allow us to look at life in a new way. And that, of course, is not all. There are dozens and even hundreds of other interesting books and lectures by Osho on various nuances of religion, relationships, meditation, enlightenment and much, much more. As a learning and self-development portal, we often quote and post many of them, and after Osho's death many of his works were acknowledged as important legacy for the mankind. At least on Indian territory, practically all of his writings were placed in the library of the New Delhi Parliament. And he himself was recognized by local newspapers for his contributions on a par with Mahatma Gandhi and Buddha. At the same time, some of his meditation practices are used even in official schools and universities, and there are still over 300 of his educational, retreat and meditation centers around the world. This includes those under the auspices of the Osho International Foundation. The specialists of this foundation also hold trainings and various events for IBM, BMW and others. And in its centers, the most famous personalities of the planet, from the spiritual to the representatives of big business, have been seen more than once. For example, the Dalai Lama or the founder of the well-known Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. Conclusion and Osho's 10 Commandments. So in the end, even decades after his death, the hype surrounding Osho's personality has not abated, even though other spiritual leaders have often condemned him for being too free-spirited and for his love of luxury. For example, he traveled in a private jet and had nearly 100 expensive Rolls-Royce cars in his garage. Osho himself, by the way, explained this by saying that one should not shun wealth and luxury as well as sexual relations because, on the contrary, this leads to disharmony. Osho urged us to take advantage of all that life has to offer. In his opinion, it is only when one has had enough of luxuries and other material possessions that one can become unattached and indifferent to them. After all, if you don't know what it is, you won't even know what you're giving up. As they say, it is indeed a great deed to give up your throne, wealth, and prosperity if you are a real king, and it is not a great deed to give up money if you have been a beggar all your life and have not even had it. It is also interesting that Osho was against traditional marriage, considering it a restriction of human freedom. He himself was never married. Although he supported the idea of living together, if that was the conscious decision of each person as a couple. But in general, the main thing is that Osho was against any templates and bureaucracy, especially in the field of love, which he claimed was the most important and even divine energy on earth. Which, therefore, should not be controlled by any state or religion. And in the end, while it is true that many people condemned and continue to condemn such views, Osho also had and still has many millions of followers who liked such ideas. Therefore, to the delight of his adherents and followers, we want to end with the so-called 10 Commandments of Osho, which he half-jokingly enumerated to some of the journalists who annoyed him by saying that it was necessary to summarize the essence of his teachings. Although Osho himself was strongly opposed to any commandments restricting human freedom, his most important commandments, or rather advice for people of the future generation, were these. Never keep anyone's commandments unless they also come from your desire and understanding. Do not seek a God other than life itself. Truth is already within you. Do not seek it elsewhere. Love is the ultimate prayer. Becoming nothing is the door to truth. Nothingness itself is already a way, a goal, and an achievement. Live in the here and now. Live awakened. Do not swim, but sail. Die in every moment, so that you may become in every moment new. Do not seek. What is there is there. Just stop and see. That's basically all, and I hope it was helpful for you to hear it again, even if you already know these 10 commandments of the wise man. But their magic is that everyone will find something useful for themselves if they wish, returning to them again and again at any time. And yes, to this day Osho's personality remains ambiguous. On the one hand, there is indeed much wisdom in his books. On the other, his behavior and methods, to put it mildly, cannot be judged unequivocally. Therefore, just like a bee picking nectar from a flower, one may definitely take something useful for oneself from Osho's teachings and leave the things that you do not like to the conscience of the teacher. I hope you have enough wisdom to distinguish the grains from the chaff, which is what we as a learning and self-development portal wish you. And friend, don't forget to subscribe to the Summary Club for becoming more successful, educated, kinder and wiser every day. Save hundreds of hours and dollars spending on boring regular education. Feel free to write your opinions and questions about each video. We read all the comments. In addition, go to our official website, where you can find reading materials or watch other videos on channel and links in the description. All the best.